In the early 1900s, a musician named Robert Johnson played blues, which grew into a faster-paced genre called ragtime. Musical styles were adopted by both genres to develop what we now know as jazz. Many influential artists arose from this style of music, such as Dizzy Gillespie, Duke Ellington, and Miles Davis. Jazz grew and began to incorporate other styles, such as the Latin music with Machado and the Afro-Cubans, and gospel with Ray Charles. As time passed, influential artists such as the great Louis Armstrong gave rise to inspired individuals such as Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Jazz became so popular, musicians began appearing in feature films such as the original Ocean's 11 featuring Frank Sinatra and his Rat Pack. Nowadays, jazz appears in many other genres, while some like Michael Bublé try to bring back the classics and keep the lifestyle of old jazz alive.
Hey guys, I'm Chris Rose. I'm a sophomore at the University of Florida, and I play the tenor sax. I've been playing for 8 years, and I was in the UF Jazz Band last fall. Started playing when I was around 11, and I was inspired to play the tenor sax when I first watched the classic movie Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe. She falls in love with the main character who plays the tenor sax, and since then I thought the sax was a really cool instrument. Smooth, sexy, and really fun to play. Alright, there are 4 different types of saxophones: the soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone. Unlike the usual sax shape, which is curved like so, the soprano is long and straight like a clarinet, and it has the highest pitch of the 4. It's also the least common sax in a typical jazz band. The alto is the smallest of the curved saxophones, followed by the tenor and then the baritone, which has a very low bassy sound.
What's the role of the sax in a jazz band?
Sax is very important to a jazz band. It provides a little bit of spice to the overall sound of the band and does a lot of embellishing to the sound as well. When there is a solo piece, it's either the trumpet or the alto sax that gets to play the solo melody while everyone else just plays background. The alto sax usually plays the melody on all the other songs, while the tenor sax will play a harmony, a support, and the baritone sax will be kind of a foundation holding all the sounds together and more support.
So, Chris, when you play the sax, what are the buttons on the sax usually tuned to?
Each button on the sax corresponds to a different note on the chromatic scale, and usually in the jazz band I play my part in concert B flat, and the B flat major scale on the tenor sax sounds like this. But when I'm just practicing at home, I like to play around with the blues scale and the bebop scale a lot. That's really fun. Alright guys, I hope I helped you understand a little bit more about the tenor sax. I'm Chris Rose, and the tenor sax is freaking awesome.
How long have you been playing music?
About 12 years, because that guy heard me play 1 or 2 songs and said, hey, if you wanted to play at Sunday brunch, you can play. And I said, well, I only know these 2 songs. But I practiced for a year, and then I started playing Sunday brunch here. And then he asked me to play on a weeknight, which I did. And a guy came by with a horn and another guy with a bass, and eventually it grew into a whole band. Been doing it for 10 years now.
Do you play with the same guys every?
No, this fellow tonight is the first time we've ever played with him. The drummer and the piano player and I are the rhythm section, and we're here almost every night. And we rotate in saxophone players, trumpet players, vocalists, and that's what keeps it different for people. That's what enabled us to go on for 11 years, because it's not the same show every night. And then I also do some thing called the Hot Club de Ville, which is Django Reinhardt music, which is no drummer. It's 2 guitars, a violin, and an upright bass.
How do you find musicians to play with? How do you connect?
Well, some of the people we use here do not live in Gainesville. Find out about us and that we've got a place where people appreciate the jazz. And 2 of the guys drive 80 miles each way to play. So over the years, a few really good players have just found out about us, and that's helpful. And then they, their knowledge is taught to the young kids in town. There's 2 or 3 sax players, for instance, that are at the University of Miami Music School or Berklee School of Music. When they come back for vacations, they get to play with guys who played with Dizzy Gillespie and tell them the stories. It's a tradition that's handed down that way.
So it's a really close community of musicians that plays.
I think, yes, in Gainesville there's probably a community of about 20 professional jazz musicians. And we like playing with the young people because they have different interests than we do. They might, many times they've taught us a song. It's not because the song was written in the last 2 years. It could have been written 20 years ago, but we just never happened to play it, and the younger guys bring it in and we learn it. So there's, cross-pollination between the generations.
When you try to make a good sound with a jazz set, what type of instrumentation are you generally looking for?
Well, one thing I learned, which I thought was crazy when I heard it when I wasn't a jazz musician, I always heard that the drummer is the most important person in the band. I thought, that's crazy. It's got to be the sax player out front and all that. But I've learned over the years now that music is really about rhythm. If you don't have a good drummer, you're screwed. So the drummer is very important. And that being said, there are different drummers in town that I would use for different types of music. I mean, the challenge is putting the right guys together. Like if you got a lot of young guys that are into John Coltrane and Miles Davis, that kind of stuff, there's a certain drummer they need to be playing with. Jazz is just so big, you can't say, hey, get a jazz drummer. There's very different types of drums. And then you need people playing the chords, good piano player or guitar player. A lot of times you don't have a guitar player and a piano player, you have one or the other. And then your horns are important. Saxophone is sort of the instrument of jazz to me, and so it's great to have a good saxophone.
Exactly.
How do you think the environment has changed and the sound of jazz has changed over time?
Well, for instance, with my instrument, the guitar, before the guitar, the big instrument for playing the rhythm was the banjo, because the banjo was loud and it could be heard. And even Django Reinhardt was a banjo player. A lot of the great guitar players were banjo players. And then when amplification came in, they all switched to the guitar. So a lot of instruments that maybe weren't feasible 60 years ago are feasible today. 60 years ago it was horn players because the sound carried and it was loud. There weren't violin players, vibes players, and sort of things where they play a quiet instrument. But now with microphones and everything, that's possible.
I think that's pretty much everything. Anything you can think of? No? All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
All right,
really
no problem.
appreciate it.